This is The Change Physician, episode 211. Well, welcome back to The Change Physician. I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And we were just having a little conversation talking about, kind of things that our fitness routines and what we do. And, with the pandemic recently, I think there's been a lot of changes for a lot of us. And I've called it the Poundemic. Or the Poundemic, pawn being bread in Spanish, that there's been a lot of comfort foods and eating and lack of exercise. And I feel like there's a lot of patients I've even taken care of, that are trying to get themselves back on track. And so I thought it would, be worthwhile. Maybe I just start into kind of where I was at and where I'm at now and what I want to do with it, and kind of the agenda, I guess, from a fitness standpoint. How's that sound?
Well, I wanted to comment on the Poundemic first, though,
the bread thing,
because we have some personal exposure there. Because it happened at the beginning. Everybody in the world started making bread for some reason, like sourdough bread. Did you?
You couldn't find the yeast in the
stores. That was a big deal. And so the advantage of sourdough is that you can create the starter, have the starter, and then you didn't need the yeast. And so we fell into that. And then I started making bread. I got the starter. I think we called it Augustus because it was great, but anyway, the long and short of it is you're baking all this bread. There's a problem though, when you're baking all the bread, then what happens next is the eating of the bread. And there literally got to the point where I was making first it's 2 loaves. I mean, it's so good. It comes out of the oven like freaking piranhas. Everybody in the house, like my kids who were in their rooms and everything, boom, we're all eating this thing.
Yeah.
But when you're doing 2 loaves a week, well, you're eating 2 loaves a week, and then it went down to 1 loaf a week. And a lot of it has to do with the sourdough, because it's like a pet trying to make the starter, keep the starter up. And I'm like, finally, I was like, I can't do this anymore. And if I make this bread, I'm going to eat this bread. So I stopped. And then my wife, about a month or 2 after that, for whatever reason, then she started reading about sourdough starters and stuff, and so she unleashed the beast. And then she's making it, and then at least I wasn't making it, but man, and then finally she's like, bro, if I make all this bread, then I'm eating all this bread. I'm like, yeah, I would never have guessed. So then she stopped, and we just haven't been making bread for a long time now. But that was a very real issue. Very real issue.
Yeah, careful what you make, because you might consume it.
Careful what you make. But man, there is nothing like bread fresh out of the oven. There are a few things in this world that are as good as that.
Yeah. It hits all the senses. I remember growing up having that smell from just, it wasn't sourdough, but bread in general, and just the whole house
smells. Yeah, it's the whole thing. So what was your fitness routine then when the pandemic hit? What were you doing for exercise?
Yeah, so my husband and I, for a month and a half, I wasn't doing any work whatsoever. And so we would, go for, at some point we were going for walks, in the neighborhood away from people. We have a kind of a wider street. So even if someone was coming, we just we'd be 10 feet away, 12 feet away. So that was our routine, is walking, which I think was a great, a silver lining from it all, because for a few reasons. One is, as a couple, getting out, doing the exercise together, getting to be able to talk. It's in a manner that it's not too harsh, breathing wise. And you actually started seeing people you hadn't seen before, neighbor wise. And so there's a frequency, and we talk about how feeling safe in this world, granted we're dealing with the virus concerns and whatnot, but it's just like anything. This goes for marketing, goes for getting to know somebody. When you first see someone, there's probably the most reservation about interacting with somebody, and then the more you see them, the more frequency, the more your brain feels less threatened by them. And so then you start engaging in conversation, and then the conversations can transform, personalities, can connect in different ways. So yeah, I think there was a beauty to the repetition of getting outside in nature, spending time with your spouse or your family or whatnot, and engaging with people, even from a distance, it gave, there's a lot of benefits from that. So I think most of it was just from a fitness standpoint, was just staying moving. It wasn't maybe the same intensity, but we also have some weights. We were lucky we already kind of had that set up in the house. We weren't one of the ones trying to buy something and they are sold out because everyone's trying to do the same thing. Were you going to say something?
No, other than we had discussed off air a little bit about making problems when there wasn't problems. And it's interesting because even with, there's always a way, and you don't need all this stuff in order to exercise in your house. So there's some fantastic body rate routines you can do. Mm-hmm. You can walk like you did. We were lucky because we also had a stable, well, not a huge stable, but we have a treadmill and everything. And what I remember in the early, how did that work? I'm kind of losing track of the time here, but the early pandemic, I think my daughter and I had done like those beach body videos a long time ago. And I still really like Tony. What's his, not Tony Horton. Who's the other guy? Oh my God. He's the coolest. He's I really like him. Anyway, he does T25 and Sean T, not Tony, Sean T.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So went back in doing those. And I remember I really like those because, they advertise it as 25 minutes or whatever. I enjoy him as a guy. And then if you're going through the program, they're relatively engaging. They're hard, relatively engaging or whatever. So that's what we did. The problem with any of those Beachbody videos, eventually you kind of get tired of doing them. So after you go through the 3 programs, alpha, beta, gamma, it's hard to go back to it. So I think that was kind of trying to figure out the next step. So, but I did a lot of walking. I'm a weirdo, and probably because I'm not an extrovert. I'm an introvert I'm an ambivert, but I don't really like going out and talking to people all the time unless it's on my terms. So I did a lot of treadmill walking where I would put weights, like a weight on me and then walk up hills for an hour or two. But yeah, it was interesting. But so that's a long way to say is you can always figure out, I guess that if you're trying to figure out exercise, whether or not it's a pandemic, the key to it is, well, how can I work out now?
Right.
With what I have. And, rather than making this complicated thing, well, I need to buy this and there's no fitness equipment, is literally, how can I work out now with what I have? And there's so many YouTube videos on body weight stuff. Even if you're doing 100 push-ups a day and 100 squats a day, that's a pretty decent workout.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting time. So as, cause I know you have some gripes about what happened during the pandemic. So what happened in the pandemic then when it came to
let me also, I almost forgot. I think we did our spin bike for a while before we started doing the outside.
Okay.
But regardless, that we did those things. And before I say some of the things that happened, the one thing that was so cool is you start realizing when you sleep a little longer and you feel more rested and you're still working out, you tend to eat better a lot of times, even though there's stresses going on in the world. I felt like it, the longer you sleep, the less you're eating during that time. I mean, I know this sounds so obvious, but if you're deprived of sleep, there's that window of you're definitely not eating that's been condensed. And so there's always this risk of okay, I have more hours in the day to start nibbling on stuff. So I did find that I felt the leanest right at the beginning, and you don't have the stresses of work. You're just living the way you want to live. So what happened after was just, it's very insidious. I probably was enjoying a little bit of wine more than I needed to, 1 or 2 glasses several days a week, and all that stuff adds up. These nutrient lack of nutrient kind of empty calories, I guess you just say. And so I think this insidious process of less activity, it started working again, and maybe I wasn't sleeping as much, and comfort foods. And then we had all these issues with sometimes getting certain foods. It was just one thing after another. And I think there's a lot of carbs, unnecessary carbs. So, adding a little like extra inch around the tummy, and depending on how you deposit your fats, mine tends to like the trunk to the tummy. And so that's not been enjoyable dealing with that. And so I feel like, my body's changed in the last couple of years. I mean, yeah, I'm getting older, whatever. But, compared to right before the pandemic, I felt like I was doing pretty well. So I've got to get myself out of that hole, Kevin. And, I like being strong and lean, and I'm not as lean as I have been. There's no real depression about it. It's just kind of like, it is what it is. And I know how it happened, and I'm just going to have to really work hard to get myself out. And that's the thing. You pay a price to take yourself to that next level, and you just have to be disciplined and dedicated and clean up your diet a little bit. A little bit of everything adds up. And so sometimes I don't feel like necessarily going hardcore on all of them, super strict. I'm just going to start ramping up the activity, and naturally you tend to eat a little bit better. At least that's the way my body and mind work with that. And so it's a process in the other direction. So there you go.
Well, and there's a bunch of stuff to kind of unpack there, because the more lived experience I have about this stuff, the more I recognize the fact of prevention. And we talk in healthcare, prevention is a big deal, but prevention in fitness is a huge deal.
Oh yeah, you don't even know you're doing it if you're just used to being fit all the time.
Well, and I'm also, and I would like to, if anybody out there is more read on this, it'd be super cool, because I don't really want to spend the time. But I'm kind of curious about the difference between fit children and fit adults, because my kind of theory, kind of based on seeing people, is people that I know that were very fit as kids, like friends of mine that were fit, maybe were athletes or whatever, they've tend to stay leaner as they got older than those of us who were, say, sedentary and maybe more up and down. Like I was a pretty sedentary kid. I was a fat kid until high school, when, everybody gets the growth spurt or whatever. And then I had these intermittent levels of exercise and intensity. And it's been just really interesting to me, because people I know, again, watching people who have been, who just stayed lean. Like, I think that is like, okay, so you're saying, oh, I got an inch. You still look pretty lean to me. And so my suspicion is part of it is your body is probably knows where its set point is. Like that. Have you looked at those set points? Like this is super, super fascinating. Like the Biggest Loser stuff. Yeah. Like these Biggest Losers and Biggest Losers being the weight loss show, where they're like 400 or 300 something pounds, and they put them through this intense thing and they lose all this weight. And then the long-term studies on them, which were sort of depressing in a lot of ways, is that most of them ended up gaining the weight back. And part of that is because their brain body has a set point. And so their metabolism slowed. Like that's the scariest thing to me, is people will say, well, it's calories in, calories out. There's actually more to it, depending on what your body's set point is. And, so I'm very lucky. My kids are very active. Right. And we've been kind of in improving them. My wife is very active. I have definitely been more active, but my mass as like a whole is heavier than I would definitely want it to be.
Yeah.
And that has been really resistant. So even the pandemic, like I was like, okay, well, I want to lose weight or whatever. I would get on the treadmill. I would literally get on the treadmill and stack up the incline, I have this body armor from when I was in the military. And then I would just walk on this thing until the thing would say, 1,000 calories. Right. And that thing is completely wrong, but it would at least give me an approximate thing to like a number to follow. And I did that for a month and I literally lost no weight. And like, I'm doing all this stuff. Like what ended up happening is finally I'm like, screw this. I'm not losing any weight. But what I'm going to do instead then is I'm going to just put on muscle. And that's when I kind of went to particularly these kettlebells and things. And what I found is I have probably gained 5 to 10 pounds over the last year and a half, but my clothes fit exactly the same. So
you're denser.
I'm denser. And it's sort of irritating, because it's like, I know I'm like, oh, our new fat, this is our new set point. well, we have some muscle. We'll just keep it all here. And if you gain more muscle, we're not going to actually trim you down. But man, it pisses me off because I want to lose, like literally, I would like to be down about 30 pounds from where I am. That's a lot more than what you got, I bet.
Wow.
And yeah. Or I have to be
you
so
don't look
muscular.
like you need to lose 30 pounds.
Oh, I do. Well, and that's here's the other thing about perception, right? So
yeah.
So when you work out and you look at yourself in the mirror, I'm pretty convinced probably everybody says, oh, I look so good. But then you see a picture of you, which is like separated by several perceptive media, right? The way it's seen. And then you're like, oh, ooh.
Yeah, it is funny when you look at yourself in an actual static image versus a reflected image. There's something about that, or video or whatever. No, and I'm going to do what every woman like would abhor and not want to do, but I don't care. Like I've been 150 pounds since like pretty much high school, college, or maybe it was upper 140s. I don't know, but around 150, I've always known around college. Mm-hmm. Very lean, very strong. And during the pandemic, I've the Poundemic, I've gotten up to like 160. And so, it all depends if how hydrated you are. That's a big determinant, of course. And or if you've gone to the bathroom and had a bowel movement. Like, I know this sounds too intimate here, but in general, like depends like when you're, checking yourself and your weight. And I don't check it very often. I can tell based on my clothes. I don't want to have to ever change my clothing, like have to buy other clothes because, that'll be my major checkpoint. But I do know that I look in the mirror, like it's when you sit down, you feel the roll. you can tell that the mushy stuff, which is not as dense. So the funny thing is that the 150 point that I'm used to, that shifted to like 152, but much different in surface area. Mm-hmm. Not to maybe outside observers, but definitely to me. But I always like to tell people, think of your muscle as your furnace and think of it as like the consistency of lead, and think of fat as styrofoam. So I always use styrofoam versus lead. What do you want to be? I'd rather be 155 pounds of lead than styrofoam. Obviously, you're going to have a combination, but that's what I'm always striving for. And the funny thing is when you talk about looking at the calories burned, I think that's just a reflection of the various levels of activity you're doing. It's not like a perfect number, but people like get off on it. They love it.
And it's so wrong. That's the thing is there's all that. If you're not like plugged into one of those machines like elite athletes have with a helmet that's measuring your carbon dioxide
max and all this stuff.
Those numbers are nothing. But the point being is it just gives you an objective number. So if you're like this, and then I look at that number and it usually, whatever it is, 7 miles or something. So
yeah. The thing is that what people don't think about, and as a personal trainer before I went to medical school, was something I always try to drill into people, is that your machinery, your furnace that you build, that especially for women, building that muscle, maintain some muscle mass it's so critical, not because of the calories you burn during that activity. It's the furnace you've created to be burning more efficiently, but more calories throughout the day and at night when you're sleeping. And then that builds that over time, that helps you get to that lean phase or leaner phase if you're doing all the other good things too. But you were talking earlier about the set point, and I've read about it and I know there's some science behind it, but I think there's also a set point from a psychological point and a lifestyle point, because you have a set point that's not necessarily, oh, this is a weight I'm supposed to be. I think the set point has a lot to do with the mindset, the choices you make, the behavior patterns you have, and then how that feeds into creating that set point. That's my opinion based on some science and my own personal.
Well, and I think I think there's a metabolic set point, and then there's that perception based set point. Mm-hmm. And that brings up to mind is those studies where again, this is not this is not to make anybody feel bad or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is there's actually studies that show if you have overweight friends, mm-hmm. you are more likely to be overweight. And I think that gets to your point, is because what you perceive and you're seeing, there's that unconscious sort of level of, well, this is normal. So if you're, I mean, there's so much there. Your peer group is so important. The people you expose you to are so influential in so many different ways. But just from the weight standpoint, is it if you're not aware of that, there's a danger there, I think, because then your eating habits or your behavioral habits or change or whatever. And if you go to different cultures, they don't look like we do, you know? So, and you know, some of it made to do with our food. I was like looking at the ingredients between what we allow in the United States as compared to the European Union, which is like astronomical. We actually did a taste test. My son loves Kit Kats. The Kit Kats in the UK taste different than the Kit Kats in the United States.
Yeah.
Because they have less crap in those. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Yeah.
But from we can externalize and blame all this stuff and say it's all food and whatever, but really there's this multifactorial thing of what you're seeing, who you're around, and you hit that the gold one for me is what you talked about, muscle. Like, you know, I know historically a lot of women, I would hope this isn't as true. Oh, I don't want to build muscle. I don't want to get huge. Well, without testosterone, you're not going to get huge. But that muscular mass is so important just for your, you know, your basal metabolic rate. And then for preventing bone loss, like being, you know, you want to stress those bones. Like it's like everything you want. If you don't stress something, it atrophies. Yeah. You're not stressing your bones, they're going to weaken. You know, we talk about, resiliency. If you're not you're challenging yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, et cetera, that stuff atrophies. And the bone one is just at least the body one is the easiest one to stress. It's like, get some weights. And balance. It's a part of incorporating the ability to balance well. Neurologically, it inputs into the muscle and all feedbacks and everything. And so it's all helping all those components. Yeah. And we may have done this. I know we've done a fitness episode and part of what I talked about, that power, speed, power, endurance. And again, I haven't gone into as much as I like, but the idea that as you age, you lose speed first, power next, and then endurance. And I was actually just talking to my wife about this because I think as people get older, they tend to actually, and the rule being, well, then train accordingly. So focus on speed, focus on power. That endurance is going to be a byproduct of it. But I think so many people, as we get older, they back off all this stuff because they're being told nonsense about, oh, you're going to hurt yourself. Oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Oh, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it just pisses me off so bad. Like, obviously don't go a marathon if you never run a marathon, but there's nothing that says you can't run. Yeah. And work up to it. work up to it. But people, I think, will focus on endurance training rather than focusing on speed and power, which are the things that you're going to lose. Right. And then the balance thing for, that thing. Well, if you listen to our Saturday Salutations, you know that a recent product of mine was, well, by the time you're seeing this, it's been a while, but this Rev balance board, and I already had a Voodoo nub board, but this balance board is just so awesome because it has a full rocker and it's literally like standing on a paddle board. And that is so important. Like if you have not, like I've always prided myself on balance. I had fantastic balance as a kid. Like, yeah, because we used to walk fences, like split rail fences that were wobbly. We would do those for fun. And about 6 or 7 years ago, our neighbor, who's pretty physically active, had all this stuff like a slack line and balance boards in his front yard. And I stood on it and I was so shocked at how bad my balance had got. That's, as you get older, you need to train for this stuff. And balance is another one that gets ignored, like you said. Yeah. If you can't recover from something that imbalances you, you're more likely to fall. If you haven't trained for strength or power, you're not going to have the muscles and you're not going to stress your bones enough that you're more likely to break a bone. So we need balance, we need strength, we need power, and we need endurance. But I would definitely wouldn't. I just think that's the last one to train for personally. Well, that brings it around a segue into kind of like what my plan is to take me out of this place is, yes, the speed and the power are important. The one caveat that people need to make sure is that
they don't go into the speed and power before they've done the gentle, gradual workup to that kind of level of stressors, because that's when people can get injured. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do that, because you don't realize that on the recovery phase, say you're like, oh, I want to do 20 jumps, and you do 20 jumps and you can do it. You probably can do it, but you don't realize the gravity forces and all the things that go through your feet, your knees, just in general, that you aren't accustomed to, and that there potentially could be some strains of things that are not used to those forces. And so those are the things that I think that's when people find out the hard way, that or they reinforce this belief that, oh, I'm older and I can't handle that. No, you were kind of an idiot in how you approached it. To be quite honest, I have to say it like that. You need to give it time to adapt to get to that place. And that's where I have been personally told, and I've mentioned this before, I've had other physicians say, oh, because of this or that, oh, you shouldn't run anymore or do that. I'm like, are you crazy? No, I'm just going to back off and then I'll ramp back up again and then I'm fine. Or even if my body gives me some feedback that it was kind of like challenging, I'll go and stretch, I'll do some other things and it'll be fine. It's you're not going to make yourself just like crumble. But here's the thing, when you get to the power and strength, when you adapt all of your tissues, not just your muscles, but your tendons and the fascial elements, all these things that give sensory input into your body. Anyway, when you get to that place and you can do that speed and power, my goal is to do some high interval intensity training kind of thing, high intensity interval training, which can be very powerful for weight loss. So that's kind of like, towards the end of the year or next few months kind of thing, where I want to get to my place where I don't have to do the long stamina kind of workouts. I can do 20-30 minute workouts, but with some intensity where they're way more effective at not just building, strength or maintaining strength, but you can get some weight loss out of it too. There you go. Boom.
Well, boom, boom. And I would other little fitness sort of tips, particularly out of the pandemic or whatever, things like you got to, if you were a gym rat and you used the gym as a socialization kind of thing, in addition to your workout, now you have to be using it as a gym, not as a predominant socialization thing.
Yeah.
But if you actually use the gym and use it socialize, I can understand where those people had some problems, maybe, but I can understand it. I don't experience it because I'm not a pure extrovert that needed all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I would, what works best for you? So if you have to have a gym because you need the motivation of going to the gym, that makes sense. I would say there's a lot of people who instead build these things. Well, I have to have a gym. I have to have this. I have to have this. When they could just be just as content to work out at home. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes a consistency thing. Like it's just shocking to me, having never been except for a very brief time when I was a senior in high school, not being as physically active as I should be for at least the last, I don't know, a long time, 7 years now. I've been pretty consistent about exercising. Mm-hmm. The key thing to me though, is it has to be accessible. So I have to be able to do it in my house. Convenient. And then doing it. And it has to be simple. And then unlike you said, you're working towards the 25 to 30 minute limits. I start with the 25 to 30. I'm like, those are the ones I'm specifically looking for because I don't want to spend a lot of time. Mm-hmm. And there's anyway, I just kind of knowing what it is that you like and don't like. Simple for me is good. Making sure it's scheduled is another big thing. I think Beachbody, I'm not to promote anything. I'm using them as an example because I have personal experience with them, but I do think Beachbody's videos there's a lot of programs on there. I think it's worth it. If it gets you to do it, I think it's totally worth it. And there's some great programs that they got, great programs.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I've used some of theirs too. They're pretty on point, efficient. And
that's the efficiency, they're usually, and I think they've learned that because they started with whatever, those super duper, whatever, 90 minutes, P90X, that was like 90 minutes or something. And all I remember is when I was in the Navy, everybody was doing it and almost nobody finished it. And then you started seeing them evolve into these shorter. So you got T25 was 25 minutes. There was another one was something 30 and this and that. And you can get these really, really good workouts. I will also say you will never look like a Beachbody person unless you follow the dietary recs.
Yes.
That's the thing they don't ever tell you.
Right. Right.
except when you buy it. It's like, you
Right.
need to follow dietary recs. And the dietary is like, whoa.
Well, right. So the reality, it's funny when I talked about there's multiple things you can do to take you to the next level. A lot of people who have been sedentary and start doing the exercise, they feel and see a change. And to take it to another level, it's layering. I always say it's like layering of various, different habits. And so if your one habit has been completely non-existent as far as being active, that will take you to a level. And if you combine it with, cleaning up your diet and avoiding a lot of sugars and alcohols and empty calories and processed foods, you're going to find you're going to take yourself to another level. And then you can, really elevate the intensity of your workouts, and you can take it to another level. And so there's always, you can always up the ante in a way to just keep taking to another. There's a point where it can be unhealthy too, where you're an extreme to the point where you're not enjoying anything else in life, and you're restricting yourself to the point where you're just, nobody wants to be around you. That's your choice, but but that's the thing. It's always about layering your habits and to keep taking it to another level. And sometimes people want to do the whole thing all at once because that's how they operate. And some people like me, when I'm not full 100% in to do it quite yet, because I think sometimes it takes the pain of being at a place you definitely don't want to be, and you have to like just totally change everything. I don't feel like I'm in a really bad place. I just know that I've got to start layering some good things so that I don't get to that bad place. So kind of that prevention thing too. But
no, yeah, I would agree. I was trying to look for, there was a great TED talk on like fitness myths. Because there, again, like all this stuff, like there's so many myths about fitness and like activity, like and as physicians, our words are so powerful. And some people that we've stayed, and in fact, I know I said this before I knew any better, but we do all these limitations. We create these absolutely false limitations that are not based in science. You can't run anymore because you got some knee arthritis. Well, the only data that I know on that is actually the runners actually had better knee health than non-runners did.
Yeah.
Or I've seen people be told because they have back pain that they can't golf anymore. There's not a single study that I'm aware of that says that you can't. And then all the data that we have regarding back pain and exercise would tell you that whatever you do, whatever exercise you do is better than no exercise you do. Yeah. And so having those really powerful worlds. But there was another one, we talk about like weight loss. And they're like, well, you should strive for, I don't know, what, half pound a week or like 2.5 pounds a month or something like that. And that was the recommendation. But then there's actually been studies that say that's actually not true. If you had rapid weight loss in the beginning, people tend to adhere to the program more. And from so all of this stuff, I guess it's sort of like when you think about economic theory, and they thought markets were rational for so long until Kahneman and Tversky came along and said, well, prospect theory, actually markets are irrational because we're forgetting this whole psychological movement or aspect to it. The same thing that comes about health is, so these things were like, oh, if you lose weight too much, then it's unsustainable. Well, yeah, you're not going to keep that weight loss off, but when you have those rapid, quick gains when you're starting something, that keeps you going forward.
Yeah, it can reinforce your belief in what you're doing is making a difference. Some of us already have that belief, and sometimes it doesn't. You just know you have to stick with it and take it up a notch. But yes, I do think there's definitely some data out there about that psychologically, how that can impact your belief. You do this happens. Oh, that makes sense.
Well, it's hard to sustain any sort of activity without a lot of
reinforcement.
Without reinforcement, yeah. That's really, really difficult to do and I guess that includes fitness, that includes, finances, that includes all sorts of things. Is the hard stuff is really hard if it doesn't seem to be making a difference.
Right. And don't forget our episode back in episode 207, influence, what people say about you too, and how that impacts your belief in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Positive feedback. Yeah.
So what is your, as you've evolved through the pandemic and now we're approaching whatever post I don't know what you call this.
It's tangential.
Everybody I know is catching
Tangential.
COVID now, and it's like this crazy thing. But we're not like, I don't know, whatever this is, post-COVID world.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Like, what's
getting back to the gym.
okay? But so if you have just like, what does your average fitness day or fitness plan look like for a day or a week?
Yeah. So I can say what it is now, but I know it needs to evolve. Currently it's, 20 to 30 minutes cardio and maybe weights at the gym a few days a week. But I'd like to take it to 5 days of some kind of weights or functional body, kind of using your own body as weight to increase strength. So it's just started because it's post-COVID, literally post-COVID infection for me. So I'm just now getting back into it. So for me, I would say some kind of cardio every day is where I'm gearing towards, and then weights minimum 3 days. That's kind of my rule to myself. But ideally, 5 days a week would be great. Not the whole body, but parts of it at least to accomplish the whole body once or twice a week. And dietary wise, I haven't really chomped on that right now. That's coming. I'm just kind of enjoying myself a little bit, but yeah, right now it's just physically just becoming a little bit more intense and get my body prepared to be a little bit more powerful, more intense workouts. That's where I'm at right now. What about you?
Well, I was gonna say, anybody who's been listening for a long time knows mine is super boring because I literally do 2 exercises.
But you're consistent.
I am super. I mean, that was the thing. When I got COVID, so I had COVID. I didn't exercise for a week.
Mm-hmm.
That was the longest period of time I had not exercised in years. We're talking like 2 or 3 years, which blew my mind. And then we flew to Europe, and then that was another 10 days for me where I didn't exercise, but hit it again as soon as I got back. And that's like the key for me. I have it's 2 exercises. So it's simple. I know what they are. They work the entire body. They're definitely not easy. I keep trying to push the weight up, and that's probably my biggest challenge is transitioning. So I've dropped back because of COVID and a couple of breaks. So I'm doing, and it's kind of fun to find out these weights that you thought were heavy are not heavy anymore. But I know where I'm going, some heavy weights. And so those transitions are a little bit challenging, but it helps me grow. Like that's the other thing. Knowing I have a kettlebell that I need to get to kind of keeps me going and keeps the what many people would say would be a very boring program for me is not, because I'm always anticipating that next weight. So it'll be interesting if I get to the 48 kilo bell. I'm not going any higher than that. I don't think they make a lot bigger than that, but it'll be interesting to see what happens when that transition occurs. That being said, because I'm moving into heavier weights, I'm trying to figure out how to build in better rest periods, because I also, it's easier if you've done something every day, that habit has been easier to sustain. Taking a day off, what I've found is that taking a day off makes it really easy to want to take 2 days off. And then if you take 2 days off, then you really want to take 3 days off. I don't get to the 3-day part unless there's a sickness involved, but I don't like that feeling of like, oh, I have to force myself back in. But when you're doing 40 kilo bells, the advice is you got to back off so that your body could kind of recover there. So I don't know. It's very challenging. I've actually started moving in lighter kettlebells and different sorts of routines on weekend days, along with walk-in. So I'm trying to put more walking into the week. Because there literally is no better exercise than walking, really, if you want anything else.
Yeah.
And and then the balance, because I've had some balance boards and stuff. I'm really trying to incorporate more balance and make it enjoyable, because I'm very concerned about, like, I don't want to lose balance. I don't want to lose speed. I don't want to lose power. There's a difference between people that are older chronologically. Like my mom hopefully she doesn't get mad at me, but I don't think it's a big deal. She's 80, she turned 80 this year. You would never look at her and think that she was 80. She's in fantastic shape. I mean, she exercises every day. So that's the stuff is like, to maintain a level of activity so that you can continue to do these things as you progress through age is, like, to me, the goal. That's the goal to me. And you have to start now in order to do it. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you can start later too. I'm not going to say if you're 75 listening to this and you're like, I've never exercised before, start exercising. It's like that tree thing. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Yes.
And it'll always help you. You know, that's the other, it was never too late to do any of this stuff, but at least I mean, I will always say, do some level of weights, something. If not weights, you have to do something that's going to build muscle, you know, push-ups or squats, body weight squats, or something that builds some muscle in there.
Yeah. Well, just to make a comment off what you said, the off days of not doing the intensity stuff that you're anticipating, look forward to, my approach too is like, there's a physical activity you need to do every day. You decide what you're going to put in there. If you need a rest day on the day, you know, a rest day after a big hard workout where you need recovery, like you've made a routine where you didn't need recovery because your body's acclimated, it's fine, doesn't need to, you know, doesn't need that rest period. But if you need the rest period for that particular activity, you substitute for that physical activity time with something else to give those muscles and those things that were activated during that harder workout a break. And you made me think of like the takeaway for today is, because I didn't mention this, is that I'd had a surgery over the Poundemic. So that period of time, and you know, a lot of other things we just talked about, you give yourself an excuse to skip, or you have to, you know, for a period of time, and it becomes easier and easier. So my takeaway is, we are creatures of habit, and make your habit a positive habit. Do something for your physical body, whether it's all those components, power, strength, balance. You can change it up every day. Do something every day, even if that one day is just you're doing stretching, you know, whatever it is, create the habit. Because even for someone like me, who's worked out almost her entire life without missing, you know, most days of the week I'm exercising. When you do take time away, it becomes easier, as Kevin said, to take the next day off. And then you start, that slippery slope happens, and then you gotta get yourself back on track. So just start, do something, and just keep it up. I mean, the power of habit is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. It's something new. One of the things that have kind of worked for me is beyond having a plan, like knowing what you're going to do, is literally a length of time that you're planning on doing it. So the advantage, say like a Beachbody program, you generally have like 3 levels or whatever. So you have the first month, you have the second month, you have the third month. So you know, in order to complete the first month, you have to actually do the first month of videos.
Right.
Other ways to do it is say, I'm going to do X for 30 days. My default has always been 100 days. I'm going to do this for 100 days. Like, we bought a treadmill 15 years ago, and I was like, to justify the cost, I'm like, I have to use this every day for 100 days.
Yeah.
And then you're doing the whole Seinfeld thing where don't break the chain, you're checking a day. Don't break the chain, checking a day. Yeah. So, but just, if you need some sort of external event, or because the worst thing that you can use is willpower. Like, the absolute worst thing that you can do is try to use willpower. You have to use some sort of external, at least in my opinion on that, is some sort of external device to reinforce it or set your environment up in such a way for success. So don't overcomplicate things. Have start simple, work to more complex. Use literally a calendar with a deadline. Oh, I'm going to do X for this number of days, and then you can evaluate, but do it for X. That's really made a big difference for me. And when you start looking at how habits are formed, that's one of the biggest things. It's like crafting this environment of success rather than an environment where it's just chaotic. And all that comes down to is just being really focused and simple. Like, what do I have? What can I do? When am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? And just doing it. And I'm going to do it for X days, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days. Because you technically find is once you start exercising or doing anything that's healthy, the first day, the second day may not feel good, but man, you're going to feel difference after a while. Like it's this delayed sense of, it's, I don't know. There's nothing like feeling strong. And I have, like, right now, I have not felt this strong since I was in high school. It is the coolest thing ever.
I love the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. It's bad. It's fantastic. But
yeah, literally wire yourself for success. All those things you just said is what's going to literally wire your brain to, deliver on whatever you're trying to accomplish. Yeah. What was
in this
that?
case, fitness. Was in this case fitness, but
yes,
yeah.
that's right. Well, why don't you take us out?
Sure. Well, thank you for joining us today, where we were talking about the Poundemic and exercise habits, and kind of how they affected and our own personal experiences there. Yeah. The biggest thing is if you get some strong takeaways from this. If you didn't, or if you're confused or you want something else, let me know directly at drkevin@thechangedphysician.com. And until next time, stay well.
Take care.